Graham put the divorce papers on our kitchen table at 7:18, beside the bowl of lemons I had bought, because he liked the house to smell clean. He did not look like a man ending a marriage. He looked like a man correcting an appointment that had stayed on his calendar too long. His shirt cuff carried Kira Bellamy's perfume, and his phone kept lighting against the wood with her name before he turned it face down. "I want a divorce. Annabelle. And I need you not to make this harder than it has to be," he began, smooth enough to sound almost kind. I waited because silence had always made Graham fill the room with the truth he meant to hide. "Kira understands the rooms I am trying to enter," he added. And there it was. Not love. Not regret. Just ambition, wearing another woman's perfume. "You have been good to me. But good is not the same as alive." The pen was heavier than it should have been. Maybe my hand was tired from years of carrying dinners. Schedules. Clean shirts. Polite smiles. And the version of Graham that only worked because I kept repairing it in private. I had learned to be useful without being visible. To sit beside him at fundraisers while he corrected stories I had helped him survive. He wanted tears. Or at least a scene he could repeat later, as proof that leaving me had been necessary. I signed my name slowly. The name he had treated like something printed on mail, he no longer opened. Graham blinked when I slid the papers back without touching his hand. And that small break in his face told me he had prepared for pleading. Not peace. "You are taking this better than I expected," he murmured, already searching for control in my calm. I looked at the lemon bowl, his phone, the stain near his collar, and answered, "You are wrong. Graham, I did not give up on myself. I only gave up on trying to make you see me at this table." The next morning, I drove to a small law office near Elliott Bay with the divorce papers still unsigned by the court and Graham's words sitting in my chest like a swallowed stone. Miles Carver waited behind a desk, covered in folders. Not dramatic. Not mysterious. Just careful in the way old lawyers become when they protect things other people forgot. He had worked with my father before my father died. And when he opened the first folder, I saw my maiden name printed across a copyright registration I barely remembered filing. I had written the reading system at 27, late at night, when I still believed useful work could survive without applause. Miles slid contracts, licensing records, transfer letters, and program evaluations toward me until the table looked less like paperwork and more like a life I had misplaced. The system had been used by adult literacy groups, state-funded programs, and online education platforms that helped people read job forms and school notices without shame. I touched one evaluation where a woman had written that she could read a note from her supervisor without asking her sister for help. And that sentence made the room tilt harder than any number could have. Miles kept his voice steady. "Annabelle, this was always yours." You were never the quiet wife in the background of his story. He explained that the work had been created before my marriage, protected under my maiden name, and managed through an independent trust my father had kept clean. The pending national education deal could value my ownership at roughly $3 billion, but the money landed second. Behind the proof that some part of me had kept growing while Graham stopped looking, I did not cry the way people cry when they are rescued. I stared at my signature on the old filing page and felt something colder, steadier, and more useful than relief. "Keep it private until the divorce is final," Miles advised, and I nodded because Graham had shown me what he did with truth when he thought it belonged to someone smaller. Kira Bellamy did not arrive in Graham's life by accident, and I learned that from the invitation before I ever heard her voice in person. Her name sat beside his on the Education Forum announcement, not as a guest, but as the communications lead helping him shape a new public narrative. The summary called Graham a champion of adult learning innovation, using phrases I recognized from old Grant dinners, where I had supplied the words he later repeated as his own. I stared at that paragraph until the insult stopped feeling personal and started looking documented. That evening, while Graham was across town with her at a hotel lounge, My phone filled with one photo from a mutual contact who thought I should know. Kira had marked up his remarks in red, cutting the plain lines about community need and replacing them with polished language about influence, access, and leadership. Graham wanted to sound important, and Kira knew exactly which mirror to hold up. A man trying to start over cannot keep dragging the old version into the room, she had written in the margin. And beside it, Graham had added, agreed. I did not call him. I called Miles Carver, because the words in that document were not only ugly, they were familiar. The program history, the community examples, even the line about people reading job forms without shame had come from materials tied to my old work. Miles listened without interrupting, then gave advice that did not turn pain into theater. Keep the announcement, the marked draft, the email headers, and the program description. Annabelle, because in professional rooms, the right paper reaches farther than the loudest voice. So, I saved everything. I saved the forum page, the screenshot, the edited remarks, and the message from the woman who had sent them because even she could hear something wrong beneath the polish. Kira had not come to love my husband with innocent hands. She had come to turn him into a cleaner story, and she had made the mistake of using pieces of mine to do it. I drove to Tacoma because Miles had sent me the address of a community reading class using an older version of my program, and I wanted to see one real room before the lawyers turned my life into documents again. The building sat between a laundromat and a bus stop, with folding chairs, a stubborn printer, and fluorescent lights that made everyone look more tired than they were. Nolan Pierce was at the front table, sleeves rolled up, helping a woman sound out a line from a job application, while another man pretended not to need help with the same form. I stood near the doorway too long, holding my purse like a visitor in my own life. Nolan looked up without any polished smile. Are you here to observe? Or are you here to help? It should have sounded rude. But it did not, because his hands were still sorting worksheets, and his attention was still on the woman trying not to cry over one sentence. I crossed the room, sat beside her, and read the line softly once before asking her to try it with me. When she got through the words without looking away, her shoulders dropped like she had been carrying shame in both hands. That was the first time the program felt real to me again. Not valuable. Not protected. Not tied to a national deal. Just real. Graham had wanted rooms with catered lunches, printed name cards, and people who laughed before the joke was finished. Nolan wanted enough chairs, working toner, and one adult who would come back after reading something wrong in front of strangers. After class, he handed me a stack of papers without acting impressed by my last name. If you care about this, come to the review meeting next month, because good intentions do not keep programs open. I almost smiled at how little he tried to soften it. I am learning to care about things I do not have to apologize for. I answered, and for once the sentence did not feel borrowed from someone braver. Nolan nodded, like that was enough. And somehow it was. The divorce closed on a Thursday with no raised voices, no courtroom scene, and no final speech that would have made Graham feel important. My attorney kept the settlement clean. The shared accounts divided, the condo proceeds handled, and every ordinary piece of the marriage placed where Washington law could recognize it. The work I had created before Graham ever put a ring on my hand stayed mine because the copyright records, trust documents, and licensing history all carried dates he could not rewrite. Graham signed with the distracted relief of a man who thought he had traded a quiet wife for a brighter future. He left the meeting already checking his phone, probably answering Kira, probably telling himself the hard part was over. I watched him step into the hallway with his suit jacket over one arm, and for the first time, he looked less like my husband than a stranger who had borrowed 20 years of my patience. Miles did not celebrate when the door closed. He only gathered the papers and murmured, "Now we can let the right people know who owns what." Marin Whitlock became one of those people by the end of the week. She ran community relations for a Seattle education foundation, and she had already invited Graham to speak at the annual forum as if he were the face of adult learning in the region. Miles sent her the rights history, the old program summaries, the licensing chain, and the forum language Graham and Kira had dressed in my work without naming me. Marin called me herself after reading it, her voice careful but not confused, and said, "Annabelle, I cannot put my foundation beside a story that has the wrong name on it." Nothing exploded after that. A revised invitation went out. Graham's role became smaller. Kira's communications credit disappeared, and the panel description quietly changed from his leadership to the original program's ownership. That was how power moved in rooms Graham loved. Not with broken glass, but with corrected names, cleaner records, and emails that stopped arriving in his inbox. When Miles told me the national education deal had finalized and the public announcement would happen in Seattle, I did not feel dizzy from the money. I felt the strange calm of a door opening only after the wrong man had walked away from it. The Seattle announcement was held in a hotel ballroom Graham used to treat like a second office. All round tables, foundation badges, coffee stations, and people smiling with one eye on the guest list. He arrived with Kira Bellamy at his side, wearing the easy expression of a man who believed a smaller speaking role was still a door he could push back open. I saw him from across the room before he saw me, adjusting his cuff while Kira scanned the crowd for faces still willing to warm to her. Marin Whitlock passed them with a polite nod that did not slow down, and Kira's smile tightened before Graham noticed. Marin stepped to the front and began with the program, not the personalities, which was the first sign Graham had lost control of the room. She spoke about adults who had hidden their reading struggles from employers, children, and doctors, then named the system that had helped thousands return to forms, notices, and job applications without humiliation. Graham leaned forward when she mentioned the national education deal, still searching for where he belonged inside the announcement. Then Marin said my maiden name clearly, credited the original work to me, and the room turned toward the woman Graham had come prepared to overlook. I walked up with my hands steady because the proof had arrived before I did. The copyright records, licensing chain, class evaluations, and revised forum language had already told the story better than any speech could. I did not mention Graham by name, and I did not need to. I spoke about the woman in Tacoma who read a job form without lowering her eyes, and about the man who stopped pretending he understood a school notice because someone finally gave him a method that respected him. When I stepped away, Graham crossed the carpet too quickly, leaving Kira half a pace behind him. "Annabelle, I did not know," he breathed, and the old softness he tried to borrow from our marriage landed flat in that public room. I looked at his face, then at Kira's hand gripping the edge of her badge, and answered, "No. Graham, you did not ask. You wanted a clean story, and both of you used my work to polish it." Kira looked at him then, not at me, because the room had finally shown her what his confidence had been hiding. The fallout did not arrive like a scandal, which made it harder for Graham to fight. Miles sent formal notices requiring Graham's organization to stop using language, examples, and program history tied to my protected work without permission. Nobody screamed, and nobody needed to. The records had dates, signatures, licensing trails, and the revised forum copy with Kira's fingerprints all over the parts she should never have touched. By the next week, partners began stepping away with the clean politeness of people protecting their own names. Marin moved her foundation's support directly to the program team Nolan helped run, and Graham's title stayed the same while his invitations quietly disappeared. His office did not fire him in public, because that was not how places like his handled embarrassment. They moved him away from national partnerships, away from donor rooms, away from anything that required people to trust the story coming out of his mouth. Kira tried to pretend she was only a consultant who had edited what Graham gave her. But the screenshots and marked drafts made that small defense hard to sell. Her clients did not announce they were dropping her. They simply stopped sending renewal dates, stopped asking for proposals, stopped calling her the woman who could shape a room. When she confronted Graham in the parking garage after another meeting ended, without either of their names on the follow-up list, her voice cracked through the polish as she asked, "Why didn't you tell me she mattered this much?" Graham looked exhausted, almost offended by the question, and answered, "I didn't think she did." That sentence ended more than their argument. Kira heard what I had lived with for years. The plain admission that Graham did not need facts before dismissing a woman. Only convenience. I was not there to watch it, and I was grateful for that. I was in Tacoma beside Nolan, listening as an older man read a full letter to his granddaughter without passing the paper to someone else. Nolan leaned close enough for only me to hear and said, "This is why you keep going." And for the first time in a long time, the future did not sound like a room Graham had left. Graham did not lose everything in one dramatic afternoon, because life is rarely that generous to people who want a clean ending. He kept his apartment, his suits, and the title on his email signature. But the rooms that once opened before he finished a sentence began closing without explanation. Calls moved through assistants. Meetings happened without him. And the men who used to clap his shoulder now offered careful smiles that ended before they reached their eyes. Kira left Seattle after 2 clients declined renewal in the same week, and whatever she had believed Graham could give her disappeared with the invitations. Marin kept her foundation clean because she had corrected the record before the wrong story became her problem too. Miles transferred the final documents into my control, then looked at me over his glasses and said, "You do not need a gatekeeper anymore, Annabelle." Nolan stayed exactly who he had been before the announcement, which mattered more than any grand confession could have. He still cared about working toner, enough chairs, and whether a grown woman could read a job form without folding herself into shame. The money built new reading rooms across Washington and Oregon, but the first one that felt like mine was still the class in Tacoma. One afternoon, I listened to pencils move across paper while rain tapped the windows, and Nolan handed me coffee without asking if I was okay. "Do you ever think about that night at the table?" he wondered. And I looked at the students reading quietly in front of me before I answered. "I remember the table," I told him, "but I do not remember wanting him to choose me." That was the real finish. Not Graham seeing my name in an article and finding no place for himself inside it, though he did. Not Kira learning that a shortcut can still lead to a locked door, though it did. It was walking into a life where nobody had to shrink for me to stand tall, and nobody had to lose breath for me to breathe. If this story found you while you are learning to let go, tell me where you are watching from and what you are finally choosing for yourself. Like, subscribe, and stay close, because peace can arrive quietly and still change every room you enter.